Well, if an election were to be called today, the new United Conservative Party of Alberta would form a majority government. That's according to a new poll from Main Street. It found the UCP has the support of 57% of the province's decided and leaning voters. The NDP are at just 29%. The Alberta Party is at 9%. That's a bump for them. And the Liberal Party comes in at 4%. The poll also found the number of undecided has doubled since April, jumping from 15 to 27%. For a reaction to these poll results and more, we're turning to the person who helped create the United Conservative Party, UCP leadership candidate, Jason Kenney. Good to see you again.
Great to be back.
I'm assuming you're not surprised by these poll results, given that you've been making the argument you combine the two parties and they would crush the NDP for months. But I'm wondering about the undecided. Did that stand out for you in the way it is for some?
Not really, but the whole premise of the Unity campaign we launched a year ago was that the vast majority of Albertans want a sensible pro-enterprise government focused on economic growth and opportunity, fiscal responsibility. I've always referenced the roughly 2/3 of Albertans who have voted for the federal Conservative Party on average over the past 15 years as a pretty good definition of what constitutes a kind of free enterprise electorate in the province. I'm not surprised that there are some undecideds because this is a brand new party without policies or a leader yet, and I think some people are going to hang back and see how it develops. But while it is only one poll, we don't want to put too much stock in it, and while we do have to stay humble and work hard and earn every single vote in 2019, it is very encouraging that we're on the right track.
The NDP, you're a longtime political tactician and strategist, and we see evidence of that given the fact that you're sitting here after the last year and all of your efforts. What are you expecting from them, given what we're seeing in these poll results?
Well, I think they're going to become increasingly desperate in attacking the new United Conservative Party. It's going to be 2 years of fear and smear. Their deputy premier already referred to their opponents as sewer rats, and the premier called them xenophobes. You know, so unfortunately, I think it's going to be 2 more years of that kind of harsh rhetoric. My commitment is when they go low, we should go high, and patiently and democratically develop a vision to present to Albertans at the next election about how to get our province's economy back on track, renew the Alberta advantage, and once again turn this into an opportunity society.
Okay, let's talk about vision then. You're now a leadership candidate, and some are taking issue with the fact that we're not seeing any policy from you. And you made an announcement on that front today, calling it a grassroots guarantee. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. So first of all, I have talked policy for a year. I've taken questions every day, over 700 events, hundreds of interviews, literally responded to thousands of questions on just about every policy issue with my own views. But here's the deal. We're starting a new party from scratch. I want to get the Democratic horse in front of the policy cart. One of the reasons the PC's fractured into two was because of an arrogant style of leadership that told people what to think rather than listening to them. So I'm proposing a grassroots democratic policy development process where the members of the United Conservative Party will, through several months leading up to our founding convention, develop the basic policy direction. And then the leader takes it from there, works with the caucus, and turns it into a platform for the next election.
But that leader will be bound by the membership's decisions on policy?
Essentially, yes. That'll be the general direction. Now, obviously, if we become government, the premier has to act on behalf of for the interests of the entire province. But in terms of party policy, let the members decide it. I really don't believe, Rob, in this kind of presidential style of leadership campaign where candidates come out and dictate a detailed platform to impose on the party, a party where the members cannot even yet be consulted for an election 2 years from now. If I were to come out there and say by how much I think spending should be, what spending level should be in the 2020 budget, or what the tax level should be.
Brian Jean is suggesting, for instance.
Perhaps, as an example. I don't know what the deficit's going to be. I don't know how big the debt is going to be in 2020. I don't know what energy prices are going to be. I just don't think that's credible. And fundamentally, I believe that this should be a grassroots-driven party to prevent the gap this huge, enormous gap between the leadership and the grassroots membership that developed in the PC party. That's what led to the decade of division.
That said, some believe that leadership is about leading. It's not acting as an empty vessel for the membership. It's about saying, this is where I stand, and I want you to come to me, and I'll take you there. So
I agree.
Let me get to my question. So how are people supposed to decide on what you stand for if you're not putting it out there in detail for them?
Well, Rob, if you want to talk about leadership, I think all you need to do is to look at what my record of the past year of proven leadership in getting Conservatives reunited in Alberta. When I started this,
But that's
a lot of
policy. That's
well,
not what people are looking for
but
in
it is-
terms of
it
what will
is-
define the new party.
it is leadership. And if people want to know my own views on policy, I offer those every day in speeches and answers to questions and interviews and webinars and teletown halls. I want to repeal the carbon tax. I want to balance the budget. I want to defend school choice.
Carbon tax, let's talk about that. You want to repeal the carbon tax. The NDP would suggest that part of the reason for that carbon tax is obviously to combat climate change. So you repeal that, how are you going to combat climate change in this province should you become premier? Alberta's the biggest carbon emitter.
Well, the carbon tax isn't about climate change.
That's not my question. How would you tackle climate change?
Well, first of all, we'll repeal the carbon tax because it doesn't do that. Professor Leach, who designed it, says that it will not reduce carbon emissions by as much as we would hope or expect, but will displace carbon-producing economic activity to other jurisdictions that do not have a carbon tax,
So
which is why we've
how
seen
would you tackle
$34 billion of capital flee the oil and gas industry. How? Partly by investing intensively in technology. I think the last government actually had a pretty good policy setting with a levy on major emitters and a tech fund. I think what
kind of technology do you mean?
A technology that continually reduces the carbon footprint of oil and gas development, of clean coal technology.
For instance, like carbon capture?
Amongst other things. Alberta's been one of the great innovators, and we've constantly reduced the carbon intensity of oil and gas production, both conventional, non-conventional, and bitumen production in Alberta. That's where we can share our best practices in technology with the rest of the world. As Premier Brad Wall says, while the rest of the world is building over 2,000 coal-fired plants, why don't we focus, instead of shutting down our plants in a hurry, imposing billions of dollars of costs on consumers and taxpayers, why don't instead we invest in clean coal technology, for example, that can be exportable to the developing world so that the coal plants they build burn cleaner and with lower emissions.
Keep Alberta's coal plants burning?
For their natural life, but ultimately this will be up to the companies that are working out deals with the provincial government right now, but I don't think it's prudent to follow the catastrophic failure of Ontario's energy policies.
Okay, and you raised the budget, so it's hard to predict where we'll be at in 2020. I think people can appreciate that, but Brian Jean tried to, and he came up with a pretty specific path towards balance, which includes $2.6 billion in cuts. How would you balance the books?
Well, first of all, with respect to my friend Brian, I don't think we have any idea how bad the deficit and debt will be in 2020. So
Okay.
to pick a number now is not, in my view, very credible.
How would you
In principle, two things. First of all, best way to reduce the deficit is through a growing economy that generates additional revenues.
How are you going to do that?
Job one has to be restoring investor confidence in Alberta, getting our tax rates back down, eliminating the carbon tax is part of that, eliminating unnecessary regulations, and stopping, to the greatest extent possible, the NDP's future increases in power prices. In other words, restore investor confidence to help restart the economy. Second point, we're spending about 20% more per person than the government of British Columbia to deliver the same package of services. Even though BC is a bigger province geographically, a higher cost of living, an older population, they should be more expensive, but they do it for 20% less. I think gradually we need to try to get down to British Columbia levels of spending. Can't do that overnight.
Talking about frontline services, healthcare services, education, those sort of things?
Well, what we need to do is preserve and improve the quality of frontline services while reducing the kind of waste and inefficiency that is in our system. Well, why don't we learn from British Columbia about how they do this? Part of it is that they spend substantially less on public salary, wages, benefits, and salaries than we do for the same people, good people, delivering the same services. So we could do a lot of that through attrition. I ran two of the largest departments in Ottawa and went through deficit reduction, a strategy that cut 10% of operating expenditures in those departments without any controversy. So I know that there is an opportunity to find greater efficiencies. In Alberta, spending has been growing faster than inflation or population or the growth in the economy for much of the past 2 decades. We simply need to stop that.
Sounds like you're ready to talk policy. I don't know why you're being so shy.
I am, but I'm just not going to impose a detailed agenda on our members.
Leadership rival Doug Schweitzer wants more detail from you, and in fact, in response to your Grassroots guarantee today, he said this: Jason's new Grassroots guarantee is simply a sad attempt to turn this leadership race into a campaign of rhetoric over substance. Voters deserve better.
Now, what voters deserve, what our members deserve, is servant leadership. What they deserve is some humility. What they deserve is ending the arrogance, the top-down style leadership of recent PC governments, a kind of arrogant insistence on telling people what to think, which fractured our coalition in the first place. This is the new party.
Arrogance. He's throwing out the word sad attempt. Is this leadership race turning ugly?
Look, Doug's a good guy. I'm not saying he's arrogant, but I am saying that in recent years, PC governments did become arrogant. That's something I've heard from tens of thousands of Albertans. Let's learn from the mistakes of the past instead of repeating them. And one of the mistakes was telling people what to think. How about we just give, I know you folks in the media, understandably, you want us to come out with a full spectrum of policies immediately, and I get that.
We think voters deserve it.
And we will in a platform for the next election. But I want us to develop policies in the same way that we developed a new party, which is democratically taking our time to improvise and rush out with a bunch of policies imposed by a handful of political leaders is exactly the wrong approach to take.
Jason Kenney, we're going to leave it there. Always good to see you.
Cheers.